All right, now, everybody. Quiet, listen to me. We're going to start a show. Now, some of you people have been with me before. You know it's going to be a tough grind, but we're going to have a show.
Hello and good morning. It is the Mark Thompson Show. Of course, Mark Thompson is at KFI. This is the last day he will be off. He will be back tomorrow. I have Albert here. How you doing, Albert?
I'm good, Kim. How are you doing? This is your second leg of 3 straight shows. How are you feeling?
I'm good. I'm feeling good. I think I'm going to make it through. I'm happy that you're here today, and happy to have Tony in the mix somewhere down below as well. We have a lot of great things coming up on the show. We've got some great stories to tell you. We've got a stories from the sky with some pretty crazy stuff going on in the first half hour. John Rothmann is going to join us at 11:30-ish, right after the news, and we'll talk about impeachment, and we'll talk about some other things political. Of course, John Rothmann, always great to hear his thoughts on all of these subjects. And then in the second hour, so excited to share this interview with you. It's an hour-long interview that Mark Thompson did with comedian Tom Dreesen. It is really worthwhile. So we will be watching that on the second hour of the show. And I'm just happy to have you along for the ride. So welcome to it. It is the Mark Thompson Show. Some breaking news today. Okay. Let the music play out. That's right. Let's talk about this breaking news that just happened. It is that U.S. Senator Mitt Romney from Utah has decided he's not going to run again. That's it.
What?
So that story just broke a little bit ago. I know it's very disappointing to all of you. He has been a very vocal Trump critic, and he has voted to impeach Trump twice. So there is something to having a senator, a lawmaker that, you know, can do the right thing, right? Doesn't put themselves before the country, doesn't put their party before the country. And people like Liz Cheney and Mitt Romney, who stood up when they felt like, even though Trump was in their party, that he wasn't representing them, and he could, you know, they could see what he had done wrong. I have respect for that. And I hope that whoever replaces Mitt Romney has that kind of character. But he says he is 76, and he says it's time for a new generation to step up and shape the world they're going to live in. And yeah, if he had another term, he said it would take him into his 80s, and he might be less productive than he is now. So at age 76, he's not running for re-election, and that is it. Is that what we want from senators and lawmakers? Do we want to have a Dianne Feinstein in there at 90? Do we want to have a Mitch McConnell having these freezing moments, you know, in his 80s? Is that what we want? We've got Nancy Pelosi, who's running again. She's going to be 84. She says she'll likely step down and that she's doing it to raise money and, you know, be smart about the process of donating her money to other Democratic candidates in districts where they could flip House seats to Democrats. I get that it's a strategic decision, but do we want voters to be able to weigh in instead of having her, you know, resign and having her seat filled? Do we want voters to be able to make the decision on who we want to represent us? I get this. Again, I get the strategy. I get the strategy for Dianne Feinstein staying in office and sitting on the Judiciary Committee. You know, that seat is not a given if someone was called in to replace her. So I don't know. I tend to respect Senator Mitt Romney for doing that. I don't know if it really means he's going to do something else. Like, I don't know. I don't think he's going to run for president again. Maybe becoming more of a vocal critic of Trump. I don't know. I mean, he's been pretty vocal already. That was the breaking news this morning. Mitt Romney not running for re-election. It was heard yesterday that the House Speaker has decided to open an impeachment inquiry into President Biden. And there's a lot of pushback about, well, you don't even have any evidence that he did anything wrong. There's nothing to say that, there's any there. You're just doing this as a political stunt. Well, there was a interview on CNN yesterday with Matt Gaetz, where a CNN anchor shut him down pretty good. Albert, I think we have the video. Let's roll it.
Evidence, though, I just have to say, we do have bank records, devices, laptops, travel records, changes in administration policy. Seems like pretty strong evidence to me.
None of which links President Biden to.
Well, it was Joe Biden on the phone.
None of which
he was calling into the meetings. But Abby, are you actually trying to tell your viewers that you don't believe that Joe Biden was involved in Hunter Biden's business deals?
It's not about what I believe. It's about whether there is evidence that President Biden is linked to the misdeeds that might be linked to Hunter Biden. That's the issue. But I want to get back. I do want to.
Come on. Wait, hold on. Can you just acknowledge that when he calls into the business deals that he's involved? When he calls into the dinners, you don't think that's involvement?
First of all, this is not about innuendo. It's not about what I believe. It's a question. Do you have evidence? If you had evidence that Joe Biden was linked to Hunter Biden's business deals in a way that is illegal, we wouldn't be having this conversation. You would probably have the votes for an impeachment inquiry, but you don't, because of people like Ken Buck and people like Don Bacon and many others in your conference.
Well, I see the evidence differently. I think that that's why we need to have the votes and have the debates and have the hearings. And again, they represent their constituents just like I represent mine, even in.
So there you go. Twice the anchor slaps him down and says, you don't have the evidence. I don't want this to be a talking point. And I read a story today that the White House is encouraging the press to question this, right? And I don't want them to encourage the media to question whether or not the evidence is there or not, because we were already doing that, because that's just a given. There is no evidence. There is nothing to say that Joe Biden was involved in any of this. And the more I have to say that, linking his name with something bad, I feel like I don't necessarily want to do it, but I feel like the media was going to question this, and we don't need to be told by the White House to keep asking, because then it makes it look like, oh, it's a Democrat thing. No, it's a common sense thing. It really is. It's a common sense thing to say, listen, you have presented nothing. We saw, was it Jim Jordan, who was supposed to have this bombshell? Oh, we're going to have the people that, the witnesses to say the bombshell evidence, and here's the connection. And then here's, is the press conference, or here is the hearing that happens, and there's a big fat zero. Over and over again, this happens. So I don't know. In San Francisco, there is the Westfield Mall. Of course, it's losing tenants right and left, Nordstrom checking out. Well, now one retailer is suing Westfield over what they call neglect of the mall, and they're requesting damages. The company is American Eagle. They're kind of a clothing store. They're hip with the young set. Yeah, American Eagle. They say the company that owns the mall has neglected its obligation to maintain common areas of the mall, allowing this place, Westfield, to become a lightning rod for rampant criminal activity, right? The filing says Westfield spent $2 billion on upgrades at its other malls in California, but allowed the San Francisco center to deteriorate even though it had the financial means to maintain and invest in this facility. American Eagle says the neglect left American Eagle employees to suffer and respond to gun violence, physical assaults, burglaries, and robberies. So they say that because the company that owns the mall did not maintain it and allowed criminals to come in, their employees were put at risk. And they detail several incidents between May of 2022 and 2023. Their employees at American Eagle reported more than 100 significant security incidents, and those included violence, aggressive guests, and thefts. They said multiple occasions saw customers or patrons brandishing firearms while verbally assaulting the store's employees, that American Eagle workers suffered physical attacks, assaults. In one instance, a customer threatened an American Eagle staff with a member with a machete. So I guess it sounds like they have a case. Who's to blame? That's the question, right? American Eagle closed down its street-facing entrance. They doubled their security efforts at the store. American Eagle says it took on personally the financial burden to protect its store, but that customers don't feel safe there because of the inaction of Westfield. American Eagle is bearing the brunt of Westfield's abandonment of its obligations, and they want damages in this case. It's interesting, and we knew this, but the folks running Westfield and the co-owner of Brooksfield Properties, they stopped paying on the mall, and they basically turned it back over to the people they took the loan out from to buy the mall. Even they don't want anything to do with this place. American Eagle's lease at the San Francisco Center ends in 2028. They have a few more years left. They aren't commenting, Westfield, on this lawsuit. They say they haven't been served yet. They haven't seen it yet. I don't know. What do you think? I mean, do you think it's the fault of the mall owner for letting it decay? Or do you think it's San Francisco's fault for allowing crime in the area? I could see a lot of people to blame here. You know? It seems to me.
I think that mall overall is just
bad news.
It's not looking good. I don't know about the safeness of it, or if there's actually all the break-ins happening there, because I haven't seen too much of it. But I know that their South Bay Mall is doing pretty great. The Westfield Valley Fair Mall is booming. Lots of new restaurants, and a lot of people still go there. So
a lot of malls are having success. So what's going on with Westfield, right? Even over at Stonestown, I know they had the loss of Nordstrom there as well, and they're putting in a bowling alley. I think they're doing bowling and arcade. So I don't know what's happening with Westfield. It seems like the whole place is just going to fold up. Let's talk about Hawaii. There is, and I think I have a picture for you guys. There is this stairway to heaven. And it was originally, these stairs were put in as a way to get to a radio tower to do work on this radio station. Stairway to Heaven. I think I might have it in here. But instead of being used for what they were meant for, now people hike up there. And apparently it's pretty cool, because when you hike up the Stairway to Heaven, and here's a picture of it, you feel like you are up into the clouds. There's beautiful views. Apparently it's this magical vista. But in order to get to the Stairway to Heaven, you have to tromp through private property, right? And it's apparently very upsetting to the people who live in this area. It's just this regular house. You have to go through the yard and get up there. There are signs saying, please don't do it. This is private property. We don't want you here. And there's a good reason for that, because there has had to be, I think it's more than 100 rescues. Yeah, at last count, Honolulu Fire Department had to rescue at least 118 people on the Stairway to Heaven since 2010. Earlier this month, a hiker and a dog fell 50 feet, had to be rescued there. It's a pretty precarious area. So if you're off the beaten path there, there's some danger. So it's costly to have people up there, because so many rescues have to happen. Not only are you tromping through private property, this Stairway to Heaven was built in 1943 as a way to reach a radio station. They had to build a transmitter tower to transmit radio signals to Navy ships through the Pacific. This was never meant to be a public trail. There isn't even an entry point with signs or a defined point saying Stairway to Heaven trail right here. None of that. No. Illegal hikers sneak through a residential neighborhood, often trespassing through the backyards of homes to get access to these stairs. So the Honolulu City Council voted to unanimously remove these stairs. There was some pushback on that. Well, now it's been announced that a $2.5 million demolition contract has been awarded to the same company that used to have to repair these stairs. Now they're going in and they're just going to rip the stairs out completely because people can't understand the word no. No means we don't want you to go through our property. No means we don't want you to go up these stairs because it's dangerous and there's huge risks and the fire department has to take a risk when they come rescue your ass, right? No means please don't do this. This is not a public trail. But so many people ignored it that now they have to rip it out. So there you go. I mean, this is what happens when you have tourists who somehow feel like they're entitled to things. It's why there's sometimes in some areas, there's a bad feeling about tourism in Hawaii because you have people that are just rude about stuff. Anyway, say goodbye to the stairway to heaven. Off it goes. I've never been on it. I wouldn't. I'm not invited there. This is not a place where, I'm welcomed, so I wouldn't go. I will say that picture is beautiful from that elevation. The view is gorgeous, and I am happy with the picture. That's really all I need. I don't need to go up there and see that when I'm not wanted. I don't know why people don't get that. Speaking of travel, Albert, how about we do a little stories from the sky?
Give me one moment. I'm ready. Are you ready?
Okay, let's do it.
We have clearance, Clarence.
Roger, Roger. What's our vector, Victor?
Enough is enough! I have had it with these monkey-fighting snakes on this Monday to Friday plane! Everybody strap in!
Let's start with a serious story first on the stories from the sky. Did you hear about this story? United passenger tried to get into the cockpit on a flight that was headed to California.
What?
It happened yesterday, I think. No, it happened September 8th. This United flight was trying to take off from Chicago. It was bound to LAX. But the plane was taxiing on the runway, and while that was happening, there was a, quote, passenger disturbance. I think this is a little more than a passenger disturbance. Apparently, a passenger tried to open the flight deck and exit doors. No, you don't try to get into the cockpit. That's a turnaround, go back to the gate, right? The passenger wasn't successful, according to the FAA, a spokesperson there. They had to call in law enforcement. They had to meet the plane when it returned to the gate. The passenger was removed. The flight had to be rescheduled and ended up headed to Los Angeles the following morning. But it is the latest in this kind of, series of unruly passengers having to be removed from airplanes. The International Air Transport Association put out this report in June that these cases are on the rise around the world. So it's not just in the US, it's all over the place. And the FAA says they are cracking down on incidents. They have forwarded 22 cases of people being jerks in the sky to the FBI for prosecution. And here's the thing about something like that. Maybe it was a mental health issue. Maybe somebody had too much alcohol before they got on the plane. I don't know why you would do this, but here, this quote is completely true. The Secretary of Transportation, Pete Buttigieg, posting on social media, unruly behavior poses serious safety concerns for passengers and crew alike, which is why the FAA is addressing it aggressively. When we get on to mass transit together, we all are in it together. We all have to be a team to make it work. You can't have people doing stuff like this and putting everyone else at risk. Buttigieg says if you act out on an airplane, you can face criminal prosecution and fines of up to $37,000 per violation. And I would say, yes, slap people with fines and then don't let them back on. And if someone's trying to open the cockpit door or the exit doors on the airplane and put everyone at risk, $37,000 doesn't seem like enough to me. I don't know.
I don't know. We just crossed an anniversary a few days ago, and trying to get into a cockpit of an airplane probably isn't the move.
That's right. That's exactly right. We'll lighten it up a little bit with this next one, Albert. There is a couple from New Zealand recounting the story of their flight on Singapore Airlines. Gil and Warren Press, they were headed back to New Zealand from Paris in June when they saw a dog as a passenger in the seat next to them. They thought, all right, well, the dog was snorting a little bit, like heavily breathing. She said, I thought it was my husband's phone, but we looked down and we realized it was this dog breathing. So right away, she's like, I'm not having this dog sit next to me this whole trip. The woman said she overheard the dog's owner saying to another passenger that he gets really nervous on planes and he needs the pet by his side to calm him down. So the couple has a choice. They can stay in their premium economy seats, or the flight attendant says the only other seat you can move to is in the back row of the economy section. So they decide they're going to stay in their premium economy seats next to this dog until halfway through the flight, the dog started farting. She said,
It's never been anything like this.
The dog was occupying her husband's legroom, so it had gone down into the well, the footwell. The passenger couldn't have the dog out in the aisle because then they couldn't get the carts through. So it had to come in further, which meant his head was under my husband's feet. The husband was in shorts, getting the dog's saliva on his legs, what have you. The couple again speaks to the flight attendant, and they were moved to an economy seat that was reserved for staff earlier. And they were told that an incident report would be filed. The airline would contact them. They didn't hear from the airline again until 2 weeks later, when they got a $74 gift voucher for Singapore Airlines website shop. She said that didn't reflect the difference in value between the original premium economy seats and the economy seats they were located to. So then the airline offers them $200 a person. She said that's still not acceptable, and I want a full refund of my flight for that leg of our trip. We didn't get the experience we paid for. We want our money back. So,
they do this to me all the time. I don't know what the hell they do it for.
They said it was really, really smelly, that they were sitting next to a farting dog on a 13-hour flight. Is that annoying to you? Is it more annoying to sit next to a farting dog than a crying baby? Or do you just realize when you get aboard a plane, whether you paid for premium economy seats or whether you're in the far back row, that, again, you're sharing the space with the public and with people that are going to bring their dogs aboard as service animals or what have you, or kids that are crying, or, people that are talking too loud or mumbling to themselves or whatever it may be. Is that just par for the course? I mean, is that too much complaining? Are they asking too much? What do you think, Albert? Were they just complainers from the get-go? Because that's kind of how
I kind of understand it. It's premium economy, so they do pay a little extra.
Right.
So they should get that price difference. But man, I took BART for commuting for 7 years, so I think
Right.
I wouldn't. I've smelled and seen everything, so it does suck that it's a 13-hour flight, but I'd kind of tough it out because that's just it is what it is.
It's 13 hours, but it is what it is. Rain says passengers need to know up front about what's acceptable and unacceptable behavior. Have them sign a document regarding consequences before boarding. It's sad that it's come to that we need to sign a passenger contract, right? John wants to know, what about a farting person? Sitting next to them is annoying. Natalie says, I'll take that crying baby over the farting dog any day of the week. Yeah. And Ren with the mask saying, yeah, you know what? I use that N95 mask for all kinds of reasons. Comes in handy. And it's true. And this is the thing. LAX Paint says the owners of the farting dog and the crying baby don't care about how you feel. I don't necessarily know that's true about the crying baby. I think sometimes that can't be helped. Well, I guess neither can a farting dog. But if that's me, I'm apologizing. I'm saying I'm so sorry that you have to, go through this. If there's anything I could do, I would. I'm feeling bad about it. If that's me and I'm responsible, I don't know. John says, no, farting is a normal bodily function. The airline was more than fair. Rain writing, children free flights, dog free flights, put the dog and the kids together on the same flight. Problem solved, done. Everybody in the back, you're all good to go. Give the dog Beano, says Phineas. Yeah, and John says being next to anything farting is pretty disgusting. That's a long flight to be sitting next to a smelly dog. But one more, Sandy says, I'm not particularly thrilled with the idea of sharing a flight with babies or dogs, for that matter. Yeah, I've known people who travel with their animal companions and everything's been fine. So I think if you know you have a farting dog, maybe you have to think about that before you get on the plane if you're being fair to everyone else. Let's talk about this flight that happened. This one was on the a Changi airport. It's a Air China plane, and the engine caught fire. So passengers on this Air China flight had to be taken off the plane. The plane was evacuated upon landing in Singapore after one of the aircraft engines caught fire, led to a 3-hour closure of the Changi airport just on Sunday.
My bad. I'm sorry.
Yeah, well, really sorry the engine caught fire. The videos on social media showed passengers evacuating the aircraft using the emergency exit slide while dark smoke billowed from the engine that was still on fire. The dark cabin inside, the aisle blanketed in smoke. Pretty scary business of this. Yeah, you can see that engine fire. But it was smoke filling the cabin, and they had to slide down the slide. I mean, that's quite a to-do. 146 passengers, 9 crew members had to be taken off of this plane after it landed. The fire in the left engine was put out about 10 minutes later. 9 passengers had minor injuries because of smoke inhalation, and cuts and bruises suffered during the evacuation. Smoke was also detected in the front cargo hold and a lavatory. So yeah, pretty scary. There's a picture too, Albert, of the of how it looked in that cabin. If I'm in that smoky cabin, I'm freaking out a little bit, because they're not letting you off the plane until they let you off the plane, and until then, you've got to breathe that smoke. And it doesn't look from the picture like any of the masks, the oxygen masks, were dropping down. Yeah, you can see nothing's dropping down from the ceiling yet, and there's that smoke.
There's never been anything like this.
It's pretty scary. They say, the Air China saying in a statement that this flight was going from China's Chengdu Tianfu Airport to Singapore's Changi Airport when smoke appeared in the cabin. Now we know because of the engine fire. They say it was caused by mechanical failure of the engine, and they're currently investigating. But of course, Air China last March had the worst air disaster in more than a decade when a Boeing 737 China Eastern Airlines flight carrying 132 people crashed and left no survivors. So kind of a big thing for them. They're investigating why this engine caught fire, and scary too. That is Stories from the Sky.
This has been Stories from the Sky. The captain has turned off the seatbelt sign, and you are now free to move about the cabin.
We have some great things coming up on the Mark Thompson Show. Of course, Mark is off today. I have been remiss, though, in asking you to click the thumbs up button. And if you're here and haven't subscribed to the show, please do that for us as well. I would like to tell you that themarkthompsonshow.com is our website, and that is where you'll find our Patreon and our PayPal link. And also the Super Chat is live here on the Mark Thompson Show.
Smash
and of course,
it
the show
with
is
your iron rod.
Thank you for smashing with your iron rod. Of course, the show is crowdfunded, and that's how we support the show. So thank you for anything you do for us, and we appreciate you being here as well. All right, let's get to a little bit of news, Albert, and then we'll be on to John Rothmann. There it is. That's right. As we mentioned at the top of the show, Utah Republican Senator Mitt Romney will not run for re-election. Romney telling the Washington Post he won't be seeking a second term. He says it's time for a new generation to step up and shape the world they're going to be living in. He said a second term would take him into his 80s and that he would be less productive. So he is not going to run again. This 2-week manhunt for an escaped murderer in Pennsylvania is now over. Danilo Cavalcante was serving a life sentence. He'd just been given the sentence at Chester County Prison. He was captured Wednesday morning, so back he goes to serve that sentence. Governor Josh Shapiro said no shots were fired in Cavalcante's capture. He was found under some foliage and some logs this morning. President Biden wants the media to use more scrutiny in their coverage of his House impeachment inquiry. The president sending a letter to major news organizations urging them to call out what the White House says are lies and misinformation from House Republicans. Republican House Speaker Kevin McCarthy said the president is now telling the press what to say. No, I don't think so. I wouldn't have sent that letter, but I think the press is going to say what the press is going to say. And the minute you send a letter to the press trying to dictate what they say is the minute they do what they're going to do, right? The opposite. We heard it yesterday with David K. Johnston, who said he was told by a news director, you will not mention my station's name. And what did he do? Exactly the opposite. Inflation is running hotter than expected. The consumer price index went up 0.5 percentage point to 3.7%. That is above expert expectations. The CPI tracks consumer prices of goods ranging from groceries to gas and more. Of course, tomorrow, the deadline to avert a strike by 140,000 United Auto Workers. The United Auto Workers union boss confirming the workers have already voted to go on strike against Detroit's big three automakers if a deal isn't made on wage increases, pensions, and job protection. Now, according to one estimate, even a 10-day strike could result in a total loss nationwide of more than $5 billion. New COVID-19 boosters are available this week. They can be found at a local pharmacy. Public health doctors say COVID boosters should be treated like flu shots. People should get them every year. And about half of adults across the country say they'll get an annual COVID booster, and half say they will not. California is expected to make the largest ever single investment to fight organized retail crime. The state wants to send more than $267 million to 55 cities and counties. Governor Gavin Newsom says this will allow those areas to hire more police officers to make more arrests and secure more felony charges against suspects. So no messing around when it comes to organized retail thefts, causing businesses to close, and all sorts of other issues. Apparently, it's never been a better time to be a Swiftie. Taylor Swift won 9 awards at the MTV Video Music Awards last night in New Jersey. Swift's VMA Hall, one shy of the record set by Peter Gabriel. That was in 1987. So I would say she's doing pretty well. I don't know. The famous Brady Bunch house in Southern California has been sold, if you follow such things. Wall Street Journal says this residence in Studio City, used for an exterior shot for the popular TV show, has been sold by the HGTV network to the wife of former HBO executive Chris Albrecht for just over $3 million. Wow, the Brady Bunch house went for $3 million. HGTV had listed the home for $5.5 million earlier this year. The network had previously renovated the interior of the home to match the original set of the sitcom that, of course, starred Florence Henderson and Robert Reed. Would you want to live in the Brady Bunch house that looks exactly like the Brady Bunch house inside? I mean, you're stepping back in time into the 70s, right? 70s or 60s? I think it was the 70s. You're stepping back in time into burnt orange and olive green and mustard yellow with those weird colored staircases and the rocks leading up the wall. I mean, I can picture what the Brady Bunch house looked like inside.
As long as the Wi-Fi is good, Kim, I could live anywhere.
You're okay? You don't care what it looks like?
Just put some good Wi-Fi in there.
I don't know if I want to be stuck in the 70s. If every time I look around, I want to, see my childhood, if that's where we're going.
It's like one of those themed Airbnbs. It's cool for a weekend probably, but living long term probably not.
Maybe that's why you would buy
situation.
it.
Yeah.
Maybe you buy it to rent it out, like a kitschy
that's
kind
not a
of
bad
thing
idea.
to do, right? Then maybe you make your money back on that house, because the way it is now, whoever buys it would probably want to rip all that stuff out and just upgrade the house and make it a house from 2023.
I'd hope not. I'd hope they keep it the same. Yeah.
Do you? Look at you being all sentimental. Oh, so sweet. This report is sponsored by Coachella Valley Coffee Company. Yes, it is the coffee of the Mark Thompson Show. And I do want you to know that there is an exclusive deal for you. You can get 10% off across the board That's right. You see it at the bottom of your screen. All you need to do is go to CoachellaValleyCoffee.com. When you get the checkout, you get everything in the cart that you want. Use code MARKT all together. MARKT, you get your 10% off. I've really been enjoying the ginger mint tea. Mark says they have the best coffee that he's ever tasted. So Coachella Valley Coffee, you can't go wrong with it, right? You give him a call, go to the website, get your discount, and get it done. I'm Kim McAllister, and this is The Mark Thompson Show.
The Mark Thompson Show.
Smash it with your iron rod.
Who's Mark Thompson?
Hey, which one of you is Mark Thompson?
What he's got going here is a situation.
It's unbelievably offensive.
Put up your pants, my man. Pull up those pants.
Ralph Nader just sent me a book. Did he send you one too?
I offer this sincere apology to you today.
Everything is going extremely well.
Call me a liar. Now what do you call him?
You, sir, are a liar.
You are a cover-up artist, and you are a liar.
Liar, liar, your pants are on fire!
Google told me.
Can you let him finish, sir? It was wrong, it was stupid, and I'm trying to be a better person.
No.
I'm going to tell you what I think.
What are the porn stars doing?
Do you have a secret now?
Does an itty bitty bit of weed?
It's 100% effective. How about that?
Say what?
And this is their new host.
There is no defense for my conduct.
I misspoke. I stand corrected.
And I wanted to apologize to the Asian community, the Asian American community.
Time's up, mother effers.
That's right. It is the Mark Thompson Show. I'm Kim McAllister in for Mark Thompson today. Mark will be back tomorrow. And actually, he'll be back in just a few moments because at noon, Mark has the most amazing interview with Tom Dreesen, a comedian who was the opener for Frank Sinatra for many, many years, developed a friendship with Sinatra. He'll talk about that. He'll talk about the mob. Really interesting interview coming up. Another one right now. I welcome in my former KGO co-worker and colleague and very good friend, John Rothmann, to the show. Hi, John Rothmann.
Good morning.
Hi.
I do want you, I have to tag on the Brady Bunch. You know,
Okay.
I still have my bachelor apartment from 1973.
Right.
And the only thing that has been replaced is the refrigerator.
What?
Everything else is state of the art. The same shag rug, the same colors, the bathrooms, everything is exactly the same as it was in 1973. So when I go to my office, which it now serves as, and I do my research, I step back in time and love every minute of it.
What color is the carpet?
A brownish shag.
Oh, yeah. I'm replacing that. I don't know if I want to see that every single time. I don't know.
You know, they've replaced in the other apartments. If I ever, when I finally give it up, when I'm long gone, they'll probably put hardwood floors in, which is what they've done everywhere else.
Yeah. And I think that's the best way to go. All right. I wanted to ask you right off the top about what's being called the most predictable impeachment that we have seen thus far. Is it the most predictable impeachment? Are Republicans being really unwise to start an inquiry like this over something that they most likely know they can't even prove? They've been trying and trying and trying. Is it just a show? Is that what we're watching?
Yes, exactly. I think this morning on my podcast, Around the Political World with John Rothmann, I spent 10 minutes describing the history of impeachment. I won't do it all for you now, but I will say that it is the most ill-considered move that Kevin McCarthy could ever make. He has control of the House of Representatives. They control 3 of the major committees that are investigating Hunter Biden and Joe Biden. They've come up with nothing. So, they should continue the process. I think this was done at the urging of Donald Trump, who wants to say, I was impeached twice. Now they're going to impeach Joe Biden. It's tit for tat. And I think it's disgraceful.
Well, he's doing it, McCarthy, at the urging of the Freedom Caucus, right? That they won't go along with votes on other things unless he does open this impeachment inquiry. So he's kind of being forced into it, is what it feels like.
His margin in the House is 5 votes. They're obstructing, the Freedom Caucus is now obstructing the defense spending bill.
I heard 4. Am I wrong on that?
Yeah, it's 5.
Okay.
As of this morning, who knows why there was the shift? It was 4, now evidently it's 5.
Okay.
But let me just tell you, these Republican extremists, and that's what they are, are holding the defense bill hostage.
Yes.
And the Republicans in the Senate are absolutely horrified by it. So my sense is that this is a political tactic. May I say that you announced the decision of Mitt Romney not to run for another term. And I first met Mitt Romney in 1964 at the Republican National Convention. He is a year older, 2 years older than I am. And I was getting my shoes shined, and so was he. We had a lovely chat. Nice guy. I mean, we were teenagers. The Republican Party is, I'm really sorry he's retiring. The Republican Party is losing a voice. A man who was the nominee of the party for the presidency of the United States, who is a responsible Republican. And in a way, I understand why he's doing it, but I regret it because I didn't vote for Mitt Romney. I would never have voted for Mitt Romney. But I can tell you that his courage in voting for the impeachment of Donald Trump, particularly in the January 6th impeachment trial, was a profile in courage.
It's the same thing where, because we disagree fundamentally on policies, especially social policies, and we're talking about domestic policies like abortion and other things, I could never vote for Liz Cheney, and I could never vote for Mitt Romney, and I could never have voted for John McCain. But I respect them. I respected them as leaders. On the other side, when I listened to what they had to say, they didn't speak with hatred. They made their cases. I understood what the argument was. There was a whole different way of talking back then.
You're right.
So I'm sad to see that caliber of person with character go. But is there something to having, when you hit 80, being too old to be in office? Or do you think that the older people should have a voice in Congress as well?
I think the people need to decide.
Yeah.
If we voters think that someone is too old or is not doing their job, that's why we have elections.
Right.
For the House every 2 years, for the Senate every 6 years. Yeah. And that's the way I like to see it. I've never voted for term limits, don't believe in term limits. I believe the only limit should be on what the voters decide.
Sandy asks a question. Is it age? He says it's his age. But Sandy wants to know, is he not seeking a second term, Romney, because he no longer fits in with the extremists in the GOP? Maybe he's tired of fighting it.
It may be a combination of both. His statement this morning, which was very clear, that he would be in his 80s when his second term expired, and he felt that was too old. But who knows? I mean, he's not taken seriously by the Republican establishment. You know what's amazing to me? I teach a course on defeated candidates for president. And some defeated candidates for president have been discarded by their party, but others have gone on to very distinguished careers.
Right.
And when you consider Mitt Romney, who has been a governor, and remember, he was governor of Massachusetts, now a United States senator from Utah,
right,
nominated by the Republican Party for the presidency of the United States. This is a man whose judgment should be listened to. But clearly he's on the outs with the Republican leadership. They are not fond of him. Any man who would vote to impeach Donald Trump in the United States Senate clearly fell out of favor with the Republicans. And I have not examined, to be honest with you, the political situation in Utah. The Republican Party there still supports Donald Trump. And it may be that Mitt Romney understood he would have tremendous opposition if he ran for another term.
Yeah, there was a comment in the chat from John Watson wondering if Romney isn't running because he had a hard time getting reelected because of his vote on impeachment over Trump. So maybe he's seeing that. But also there's some folks wondering whether this is a dig at Biden to leave. Maybe he planned to retire anyway or not to run anyway, so that maybe using age is like a political dig.
Yeah, there's no question. Yeah. Mitt Romney is saying it's time for the older generation, including Donald Trump and including Joe Biden, to retire from the scene. And I think there are a lot of people with whom that might resonate.
Yeah.
But the simple fact is that Mitt Romney is 76 years old. He's in very good health. He's an extremely articulate Republican. He opposes Donald Trump vigorously. And the one thing I would expect from him in 2024, as his term expires, that he will continue that opposition. He'll do it as still a member of the U.S. Senate. His term doesn't expire till January of 25. And I think that will have a real impact. Now, here's the question. Does anybody care what a defeated candidate for president thinks? Because even the millions who voted for Mitt Romney, today, it's a blip on the screen. He's just another voice. And that also is a commentary.
I feel like he has a big enough name that when he speaks or makes a comment, it's usually, it becomes news. So I think he has a big enough following that people may still care what he has to say, even if he's not a senator.
Right.
Yeah.
I hope that's correct.
Let's talk a little bit about something else that happened today. Former President Trump is being restricted on how and when he can look at, talk about classified information, right? A judge decided this today after a sealed hearing yesterday, and it is largely in line with restrictions Special Counsel Jack Smith sought to protect classified information that may be evidence in the case against Trump, accusing him, of course, of mishandling criminally the sensitive national security secrets at Mar-a-Lago. So that means that for the first time, the court has some limits around this classified information, how he can access it, when and why, and talk about it as well.
Well, you have to understand, he is a former president of the United States. Every former president of the United States receives briefings from the CIA. They all are in constant touch, at least theoretically, with opinion makers. And so when a judge gives an order to Donald Trump, based on the fact that he faces a criminal case, because he did violate national security, and there's no question about it.
Yeah.
How does that play out? And it's a very interesting question. Should a court be able to say that a former president of the United States should not have access to information? And that, I'm sure, is something that Donald Trump will fight vigorously. I am in favor of former presidents still being in the loop in general. But Donald Trump, to me, is an exception to the rule because he has so violated on every level all the rules of, security, national security. He stands a very good chance of being convicted of the crime, and it is a crime, of violating national security. And so that is something you have to take into account. Donald Trump is not a normal former president. Let's put it that way.
Yeah.
And it's very clear that the people who make these decisions are very concerned about him.
I feel like, and this is Judge Eileen Cannon, right? So I believe she's a Trump appointee in this case.
That's correct.
She says she's warning in this order of that consequences, there will be consequences if any of classified or otherwise sensitive information is improperly revealed to the public, pointing out such disclosures may violate the law. And as said in the chat, that Trump is a blabbermouth, that he gets up in front of a microphone and he just he just can't be quiet about anything. It's like there's no filter, right? The secrets spill out, things that aren't supposed to come out. And so I don't know if it makes a difference for a judge to say, listen, you can't have access to these documents. We need to protect these documents from you. He's probably already seen them, right?
No, he may have access to new material as well. As I say, former presidents traditionally receive briefings, particularly if, Donald Trump hasn't traveled abroad, but particularly when you travel abroad, you're brought up to date so that you don't make mistakes.
Right.
But Donald Trump is not a conventional former president. And that's the problem. Jimmy Carter, Barack Obama, George Bush, all receive briefings.
The daily
when
briefings.
They travel abroad.
But I don't think this is what that's about. Apparently this is protecting classified information that may be evidence in the case against Trump.
That's
now,
correct.
It may be that daily briefings as well, but it may be the stuff that he had that was recovered that they don't want him to have access to anymore, which makes perfect sense to me, because if he mishandled it once, what's to say he couldn't mishandle it again?
You've summed it up splendidly.
Okay. Let's move on to another legal case. There's a judge in the case about Mark Meadows. Mark Meadows was trying to get his case moved from Georgia to federal court, right, for a myriad of reasons.
In Washington, D.C.
Right, a federal court in D.C. And the judge, he wanted the judge to pause on the decision to keep the Georgia election case in state court. And the judge is saying, I won't do that. There's not going to be a pause for you. And Meadows was saying, look, I could be convicted and incarcerated before an appeal to this is even heard, so I want you to put a pause on it. And the judge says no. A U.S. District Judge Stephen Jones rejecting a request by Mark Meadows, who is the former White House Chief of Staff for Donald Trump, that he pause this decision not to move the Georgia election subversion case to federal court. Jones unmoved. Here's the quote. Meadows' contentions that he would be irreparably harmed by the possibility of facing trial next month are insufficient to carry his burden on the emergency stay requested. No trial date has been set for Meadows, and he admits it is not guaranteed that his trial will be in October. Denied. There you go.
Cheers for the judge. The judge is right. I've studied chiefs of staff. I've participated in seminars dealing with chief of staffs. There are a number of books that have been written either by former chiefs of staff or, in fact, 8 chiefs of staff sat on a stage at the University of California and talked about being chief of staff. Yeah. Mark Meadows is not protected by anything. Remember, Sherman Adams, who was Eisenhower's chief of staff, had to resign. Why? He accepted a vicuna coat. Can you imagine? That was enough to force him out. Bob Haldeman, who was one of the most capable chiefs of staff, ultimately was convicted of a conspiracy with President Nixon to obstruct Watergate, the investigation, and went to jail for it. A chief of staff has to act responsibly, and Mark Meadows clearly blew it. Now, let me remind people the atmosphere in the White House. You believe you are above everything when you're in the White House. It's a real power surge, if you will. And I think Mark Meadows fell victim to that. What will be more interesting to me now is whether Mark Meadows flips on Donald Trump. If he flips on Donald Trump, it'll be Trump's word versus Meadows' word. And this is going to be a very interesting moment in the course of American jurisprudence. I'm waiting for Mark Meadows to be on the stand.
Do you think Meadows will flip?
I think he probably will. And I believe that because if he doesn't, he almost certainly will go to jail. It'll be a plea bargain. That's what happens.
I mean, I guess you're taking that would be a big chance to take, because if he flips, then he's the villain to the GOP, right?
Not necessarily.
If he
doesn't care. He doesn't care if he's a villain to the GOP. Let me remind you, the first thing you want to do is protect yourself. And he's not going to take the rap for Donald Trump.
Well, what happened to that? Because hasn't always been how it is. Used to be that if something happened to a president, the people around him would then fall on their swords to protect the president.
Not necessarily. All you have to do is read the memoirs of many White House insiders to see that people like to spill their gut. And the other thing is, everyone wants to protect their place in history. Mm-hmm. When you've worked in the White House, you have a place in history. And you want to protect that place. And that is, I think, what Mark Meadows will do. And you can go back to chiefs of staff or people who worked in the White House over and over again who have precisely done just that. They protect themselves first.
Vilma writes, Meadows won't flip because they believe Trump will be reelected. Or even if any Republican is reelected, there's going to be, pardons flying. So maybe it's not worth flipping if you really believe that you're taking a chance that you could get a pardon from a Republican. I don't think the Democrats are going to roll in and pardon.
Yep. The way Donald Trump has talked about Mark Meadows in recent days, if I were Mark Meadows, I wouldn't put any on Donald Trump doing a damn thing for him. Be very honest with you. But remember, Donald Trump said he only appoints the very best people.
Is that right?
And look how many chiefs of staff he had. Look at members of his cabinet who have flipped on him. I mean, I think the real case is look at all the people who supported Donald Trump who no longer support him.
Yeah, that's true.
And that to me is the key. If you don't have the loyalty of your staff or people you've worked with, whether it's former cabinet officers or White House officials, I think your credibility is brought into real place. If I were leading the campaign against Donald Trump in 2024, I would just have all of those people do a commercial. Each one of them. From Rex Tillerson. You remember Rex Tillerson, who was Secretary of State? Now, you can go down the list.
Yes, of all the people that had to get out of there. Yeah.
Yeah. And many of whom faced real legal problems as well.
Let's talk about Tommy Tuberville.
Oh, gosh.
And his hold on military promotions and how this has been allowed to go on and on and on. Well, there's a new memo that is out that says Tuberville's hold on military promotions will take hundreds of hours to process individually.
300 hours is the estimate I read this morning.
I'm reading another one. According to CNN, it'll take the Senate about 700 hours of floor time to individually process and vote on hundreds of military officers whose promotions are being blocked by Tommy Tuberville. That, according to the Congressional Research Service,
it's
in
so
a memo,
irresponsible.
700 hours. Really?
The Republicans need to discipline this member of the Senate. They need to say, you can't keep doing this. But those are the Senate rules. So you know what you do then? You rewrite the Senate rules. Right. One senator should not have the ability to hold up the promotions for over 300 military people who, by the way, you understand that Mark Milley, the chief of staff, is retiring next month.
Yeah.
And his successor has to be confirmed. Well, Tuberville's holding it up. So what does that mean? It means the Senate may have to vote separately just on Mark Milley's successor. I mean, it's a disgrace. The real question will be, Alabama is a military state, tremendous military presence in the state of Alabama.
Right.
What will the voters in Alabama say when Tuberville runs for re-election?
I would hope they would say, you're not doing the people's work.
I'd hope they'd throw him out on his you-know-what.
I hope so, too, because all over abortion, you're holding up the business of the American people because you're trying to make a point.
You know what's crazy, Kim? If you are in the military and you are in a country where you cannot receive particular treatment because of religious views, whatever the case may be, the military flies you out free of charge to get treatment where you can. Yeah. The same thing applies here. Yeah. And federally, what Tommy Tuberville is doing is a disgrace. Yeah. And interestingly enough, the Republican leadership understands that, but they're afraid to antagonize him because they need his vote in the Senate.
I agree.
And it's a shame. Look, I hate to say this, but the Republican Party has failed on so many levels. It's unbelievable.
John Rothmann, I can't even believe it. Our half an hour together has gone whipping through time and space, and it's over. I know.
Tell me it isn't so.
It's true. I adore you. Thank you for coming on the Mark Thompson Show and always being here. If you haven't seen or heard Around the Political World with John Rothmann, check it out. It's on all podcast platforms. You can find it there. Just do the search. And thank you for being on the show. Have a great afternoon.
Thank you, Kim. Talk to you soon.
Bye. I wanted to get right to this wonderful interview that Mark has done me, all of us, really the favor of leaving us. It is a really special conversation that he has had with Tom Dreesen, who is the comedian that did most of the opening as the opening act for Frank Sinatra. The stories of friendship with Frank Sinatra, of hanging out with all these people in that era of the mob and all of these things. This is a real throwback to show business and really worth it. So I hope you'll stay with us for this interview. So right now, I would like to get my LaCroix, get a little drink, get some snacks, and kick back and enjoy this interview that we have of Mark Thompson and Tom Dreesen.
The Mark Thompson Show.
This is a thrill for me. I've been looking forward to this for some time. I've been watching this guy and in stunned admiration of how comfortable he weaves the most fabulous stories through a comedy act and through conversation. And indeed, he has had record-breaking appearances on television. Late Night with David Letterman, The Tonight Show, and opening act for Frank Sinatra for 14 years all over the globe. And he's appeared in over 500 television programs. I'm getting this from his website. And it's no surprise. I mean, you've seen him on so many different shows. And one of the reasons I like him is because he is a connection to what I really feel was show business. I mean, the show business that I grew up thinking, wow, like I'm talking Liza Minnelli, Natalie Cole, Smokey Robinson, Sammy Davis Jr., and Frank Sinatra. And his stories around Frank Sinatra and growing up in Chicago inform so much of his great comedy. But he's a virtuoso comic, and he's still working.
Probably the best stand-up in the racket.
He's funny. Did I say that twice? Oh, good. Well, he is.
Here he is. Personal favorite of mine. This guy, among the new comedians, is young and gifted.
Very much. You look great. That's all we need, another bright new young comedian.
Good friend of mine, a wonderful comedian.
Please welcome my old buddy,
Tom Dreesen.
Tom Dreesen.
Tom Dreesen.
Tom Dreesen.
Here he is, Mr. Tom Dreesen.
Tom Dreesen.
And to this day, people say, "Who's Tom Dreesen?" It was a great start.
All right. Put it together for Tom Dreesen, everybody. I'm super excited to have you here, Tom Dreesen. Thank you for being here.
Thank you, Mark. I enjoy it. I always enjoy talking to people that, especially people who love the business that I've been in for 53 years. You know,
I adore it, and I adore the stories, and I feel somehow like I wished I'd lived in that time. I don't know if that, maybe we always see it, the grass greener thing. But I neglected in the intro, and I want to do it now, and I'll mention it also throughout our conversation along the way. But you also did a book which does chronicle some of what we'll probably touch on today and those stories with Sinatra. I think it's called Still Standing, right?
Yeah, the title is Still Standing. The subtitle is My Journey from Streets and Saloons to the Stage and Sinatra. And it's just it's a retrospective of my life. And it's done real well. As I said in the pre-interview, that I had over 450 five-star reviews, and people really enjoy the book a lot. And I'm glad, because I'm an avid book reader myself, and I like to read a good book. And I'm glad people are enjoying my journey, because there's a lot of ups and downs, and it's a story of triumph. Because in this business that we're in, and prior to me ever being in show business, I was knocked down a lot in my life. Still standing is a double entendre. I've been a stand-up comedian for 53 years, but I've been knocked down a lot in my life, and I kept getting back up again. And so it's a story of triumph, and I hope it encourages other people to get back up again.
Well, it's interesting you say you've been knocked down. You actually started down. I mean, I think you, one of the other reasons I have mad respect for you is that you started as not a stage guy. You started, I think, as a kind of a working class guy in Chicago. I mean, you were in construction. You were in, this is all the stuff I know of your life is one of having, being a long way from show business to begin.
No question about it. I came from a family. We had 8 children. There were 8 of us, 4 boys and 4 girls. We were very poor, very poor. We lived in a shack. We had no bathtub and no shower and no hot water. It wasn't during Depression. I'm not that old, but I'm but I'm not a kid either. But anyhow, it was if a window broke, you stuck a rag in it. If you had holes in your shoes, you put cardboard in it. We were raggedy poor. I shined shoes in taverns from the time I was 10 years old. I set pins in bowling alleys. I caddied in the summertime. I sold newspapers on the corner, all to help feed my brothers and sisters. And none of this do I regret. But that's how I grew up. And by the time I was 16 years old, I dropped out of high school because I was going to high school. You know, Mark, when you go to high school, everybody dresses to the nines, or people have their daddy's car and all that. And I had holes in my shoes and raggedy clothes. So I dropped out of high school at 16. At age 17, I went into the Navy. Prior to that, though, I ran with a pretty tough crowd growing up in pool rooms and stuff like that.
Yeah, that's when you talk about saloons. I mean, you really you inhabited that world, or it was all around you anyway, even as a kid, right?
Yeah, there were 38 taverns in Harvey, Illinois. I grew up in a suburb on the south side of Chicago, Harvey, Illinois. There were 38 taverns in Harvey. My father was well known in every single one of them. But I shined shoes at all the bars. There were 8 in my neighborhood that I shined shoes in, and it had an effect on me, because my mom was a bartender in one of those taverns. And so I would shine shoes at all 7 of the taverns, and I'd go to that tavern, my last tavern, and I would sit there and wait till the factories changed their shifts, and then I'd go back out again. But while I was in there, my mother behind the bar, my mother's brother-in-law, Frank Polizzi, was behind the bar, and he told jokes. And I was fascinated that this guy, with his vocabulary, his vernacular, could hit a punchline and cause this sound to come out of everybody's body, this laughter that filled the room like electricity and united everybody. And I was so fascinated by that I used to tell a lot of his jokes, many that should not be told on a Catholic school playground, you know. But
and
that
you
was
you were an altar boy, as I recall, right?
Oh yeah, I was an altar boy. I was all those things in Catholic school, but anyhow, so that was my childhood.
But in addition to him giving this sort of gift of laughter, there's a popularity that comes with being able to make the whole room laugh like that, right? It's a status, I think, almost. Am I wrong?
No, you're absolutely right. But also, I love making people laugh. I once wrote a poem called "The Sound of Laughter," and I'm not going to do it for you, but it's in my book. But the opening lines are, "As far back as I can remember, or shortly thereafter, I love to hear the sound of laughter." But, you know, and the other thing too, truthfully, most comedians would never admit this, but they suffer from an addiction. It's called approval addiction. Sure. And night after night, you're going out there for approval. And when they're laughing, that's about the greatest approval you could possibly get, you know, other than a parent telling you they love you, you know. Sure.
And it's interesting, and so many that didn't get that parent telling them I love you seek comedy or seek the stage to sort of make up for that void. I see what you mean. As a kid, you know, these impressions, they stay with you. And so you, from that background, never would have connected you to this amazing rise in show business. When was the first time you actually took a stage as a stand-up?
Well, but I wanted to complete one thing. At age 17, I went in the Navy. I spent 4 years in the Navy. I got a high school diploma from the Navy. I went to junior college nights, and I started reading books all on how to improve the mind. Way back to Norman Vincent Peale, The Power of Positive Thinking, A Guide to Confident Living, Maxwell Maltz, Psycho-Cybernetics, Joseph Murphy, The Power of Your Subconscious Mind. And I started applying those sciences to my life. But I get out of the Navy. I got a wife. I get married. I have one child, another child. Pretty soon I have 3 children. I'm doing construction work. I'm a Teamster. I'm loading trucks. Then I dropped my Teamster card. I became a foreman of these 48 guys that I used to work with. I was now their foreman, which was another story in itself. But I was a bartender and at nights. And so I was just wandering aimlessly. And I actually got to the point where I'd be in a bar with my buddies some nights. At 2 o'clock in the morning, I'd look around and say, I don't belong here, but I didn't know where I belong. And Mark, I honestly started praying. I said, God, what is it I'm supposed to be doing? I joined the JCs, a civic group. JCs were Young Men of Action in those days, and they worked on community problems. And by working on the problems of the community, you learned how to serve on a committee, how to chair a committee, subcommittees, how conduct a meeting, Robert's Rules of Order. And I start working on problems of the community. One of the biggest problems in those days, as today, were our young people and drugs. So I wrote a drug education program teaching grade school children, 8th graders, the ills of drug abuse with humor, a concept I had. Play some music, do some funny things, get them laughing, and then plant the seeds of the ills of drug abuse. I wanted to get them before they went into high school. In many cases, we were too late even at that. Now, at this time, and I say, I'm praying, God, what am I supposed to be doing? Show me. One day, I proposed this at a JC meeting, that I wanted the JCs to sanction this project, and then I was going to go into the schools. And I had a friend that was going to help me, a white guy named John DeBoer. He was going to work with me. He was in the JCs. At that very first meeting, a young black man from Norfolk State College, he was graduated Norfolk State College. E.I. DuPont recruited him into Chicago as a marketing rep, and he joined the JCs. He walked up to me afterward. He said, gee, I'd like to work with you on that project you have. I said, I'm sorry, I've already got a guy. As fate would have it, or prayers answered. The next day, John DeBoer calls me and said, Tom, I can't do that with you. I've got a new job. I said, gee, what was that black guy's name? Oh, yeah, Tim Reed. So Tim Reed and I sit down, we rehearse it. We walked into that classroom the first day, and I knew, oh, what a blessing, because the students were black and white. We had integrated classes. So the moment we walked in, two young guys, a black and a white guy, we got their attention. And we played off of one another. We played music and got the kids laughing, and we planted the ills of drug abuse. The program became #1 in 50 states and in 22 foreign countries through JC publications on how to teach drug education at an elementary school level. Because in those days, they were teaching drug education at a college or a high school level, let alone an elementary school level. One day, a little 8th grade girl walking out of the classroom stopped and said, you guys are funny. You ought to become a comedy team. And the thought of a black-white comedy team intrigued us because no one had ever done that before. So we said, you want to do it? Yeah, I'll do it. We didn't know what to do. We would sit down and write what we thought was comedy. Now, in those days, there were no comedy clubs in America. There were none. No comedy clubs. It was 1969. And so we had put together an act for a nightclub. So long story short, we start working what they affectionately call the Chitlin Circuit, black-owned, black-operated nightclubs. In Chicago, the Burning Spear, the High Chaparral, the Guys and Gals Lounge, the Cotton Club.
Had you been to those places before, Tom?
No.
Or was this okay?
No. Although I grew up in Harvey in a predominantly black neighborhood, and I played basketball on an all-black basketball team. I played football on an all-black football team, and that was a lot of my routines that I would do in my earlier days about being the only white guy in an all-black situation. As a matter of fact, I have an album in front of an all-black audience called That White Boy's Crazy. I'm the only white comedian ever to do an album in front of an all-black audience. And whenever people would question me about it, how could you do that? How could you go in front of an all-black audience? And I always had the same answer. What color is laughter?
Oh,
What's the color of laughter?
Great response.
So, and I trademarked that and have it copywritten and everything. That's another story about another time. But anyhow,
Tom, didn't they give you a nickname on the playground when you were playing the only white guy on a black basketball team? What was your nickname?
Spot.
That's great.
That's on the album too. Yeah. And another thing.
And that's for real. That's for real. That's not a bit.
Oh, I know. I used to do so many routines about that. We had a coach named Rather. He was a black Vince Lombardi, and I'm on this all black basketball team. And if we played an all white team, at halftime, if we were losing, and we'd be in the locker room, and the coach would be in there, he's giving one of them. He said, "Don't tell me them white boys can outshoot you. I ain't talking about you, Tom. Don't tell me them white boys can outrun you. I ain't talking about you, Tom." Yeah.
That's great. That's absolutely great.
But that was my introduction. So my first time on stage, in answer to your question, you notice you ask a short question and I give you a long.
I love it.
So the first time I went on stage, we had to go on stage somewhere at some point, and we went on stage one night. We were so scared. We had neither one of us had ever been on stage before. We wrote what we thought was funny stuff, and there was a jazz group, and they took a break, and the owner said, "You guys can go up and entertain the crowd." We got up and we went 100 miles an hour. We didn't wait for laughter. We just wanted to get through our routine. Hi, we're the comedy team of Tim Tom. He's Tim, I'm Tom. We just drove in and we just 100 miles an hour. We rushed off the stage after about 12 minutes. We got the owner in the corner, said, how'd we do? What'd you think? He said, whoa. I don't know how you did. You never gave me a chance to laugh. He said, come back tomorrow and slow down. And we came back the next day, and I can remember like it was yesterday. One of the first lines out was something I had written. It got a laugh, and like it was like a B movie where the dark clouds open up and the sun bursts through, and my whole being went, "Oh yeah, this is what I want to do. I want to be a comedian." I never turned back from that. I have to tell you this: it was a Friday night. The next day was Saturday. I couldn't sleep all night long. I had a wife and 3 kids. I couldn't sleep. I got up in the morning and I went down to the corner church where I had been an altar boy, where I sang in the choir as a little boy. And there's no one in the church. It was a Saturday morning. And I got on my knees. I prayed. I said, God, now I know what I want. I want to be a comedian. If you let me make my living as a comedian, I'll do charities. I was making all these promises, and all my prayers have been answered.
Boy, you're not kidding. Time. I mean, it's extraordinary. But that's that. And Tim Reed, who we saw, people may know him from WKRP. Wasn't he in? I mean, that was a high profile. Is that who I'm thinking of, right?
Sure. Tim Reed was in After 6 years, the team split up. Tim wanted to be more of an actor, but it was traumatic for me because I thought Tim and Tom that was the name of our act, Tim and Tom. Sure. I thought it was going to be I wanted it to be the greatest comedy team that ever lived. It was America's first black and white comedy team, and history shows it's the last. There's never been one since us. That was 46 years ago.
Wow.
But Tim went on to be Venus Flytrap on WKRP in Cincinnati. He was on a show called Simon and Simon. He was Downtown Brown. He was on many sitcoms, and recently on a show called Sister Sister with the 2 black twins. He was the father. He's a great director, a great actor, and a great friend. We're the best of friends to this day. His children call me Uncle Tom, which is funny in itself.
Yeah.
We wrote a book a few years back in 2005 called Tim and Tom, an American comedy in black and white. And I'll give you a real quick funny story. We were on a book tour promoting the book, and we went to his college, Norfolk State College, which is an historical black college, Norfolk, Virginia. And we were going to speak to the students. But prior, they had a lunch, and I was at a buffet with 6 or 7 college professors, all black. And Tim's daughter had not seen me in about a year, Tori. And she came in, she's about 40 yards away, and she starts hollering, Uncle Tom, Uncle Tom, Uncle Tom. These professors turned around and looked at her, and I said, she's talking to me. She's talking to me.
That's a great story. That's a really great story.
She came up and hugged me. I said, honey, you don't want to shout that out at an all
Yeah,
black
that's
guy.
just
She
not
said,
right.
Oh,
That's
I never thought. Yeah.
We're working hard for civil rights here. So I want to skip to, and then I'm going to double back because there are a couple of stories from your childhood I know of. And I mean, there are a jillion that you tell, but in your books and in your stand-up and even in your speaking, you do a one-man show, which I'm sick that I haven't seen. Are you still touring that at all or not?
Yeah, I'm leaving in 2 days. I'm leaving for the Midwest. I'm doing it in Michigan City, Indiana, at a theater called Uptown Social. Then I'm going into Lake Forest, Illinois, and doing it again at the John Hughes Theater. It's called The Man Who Made Sinatra Laugh. It's a 90-minute show of stand-up comedy, of course. A screen comes down, and Dennis Farina, God rest his soul, introduces me on a film. And then after the film, I come out and I do stand-up comedy for about 30 minutes. Then I segue to a bar on the stage that has a bottle of Jack Daniels, which is Frank's drink of choice, was his drink of choice. And as I tell a funny joke at the bar, all the lights go out in the theater, and on the screen, Frank is singing to me. I'm behind the bar, he's singing to a bartender. It's 2:45. There's no one in the place except you and me. So when he gets to the chorus, he goes off screen and the spotlight hits me, and now the audience is in a bar with me. And I tell them, the first time I heard that voice, I was 10 years old, and I was shining shoes in Harvey, Illinois. And I take the audience from that little boy hearing Frank Sinatra on the jukebox in Harvey, Illinois, to one day carrying his coffin out of a church in Beverly Hills, California. So I take them on that journey with a lot of funny stories and poignant stories. But on the screen, pictures are coming on the screen and video authenticating the stories I'm telling. It's a fun.
I mean, it's remarkable. You were essentially, what you're saying is you were a fan of Sinatra growing up with him, and then ultimately you were his pallbearer. You became that close to him. You hung with him with this crowd, as I say, that I sort of think of as, legit big time show business, a Rat Pack, the Sammy Davis Jr. Sammy Davis Jr. I only met once. and it was it might have been in the 80s. It was for a retinitis pigmentosa telethon, and he was there, and it was a small studio in Hollywood. And I mean, by comparison, it wasn't some huge soundstage. And I mention it because he's this slight dude, and then he comes on and he blows the back off of the place with his voice. It was unbelievable. He can do everything, right? He could do impressions. He could dance. He may have been one of the most talented people to ever live, wouldn't you say?
No question about it. I toured with him for 3 years. I would sit in the wings every night. Like most of the time, like there's things you can do, show business 101, where people are going to teach you as you're coming into the business a little bit about show business. Sammy was a master class to sit in the wings night after night and watch this incredible performer who had been on stage since he was 2.5 years old. He was a little boy traveling with his father. They actually put him in a little drawer in the hotel room. They pulled a drawer out. He was that tiny, but he introduced me to so many things in show business. I just done my first appearance on the Tonight Show, and I was getting real hot. And I did a show with him called Sammy and Company, a TV show. And he liked me. He said, I'm going to take you on the road with me. And he did. For 3 years, we toured all over. And then also after that, it was Natalie Cole, like you said, Natalie Cole, Liza Minnelli, Gladys Knight and the Pips, James Darren, Frankie Avalon, Mac Davis, Tony Orlando and Dawn, Smokey Robinson.
Unreal.
All these, the reason why these acts used me in those days, that was before cable television. And so they had family audiences for the most part. And they wanted a comedian that didn't work what we call blue. I had to write clean material. I did 61 appearances on the Tonight Show. Every time you did the Tonight Show, you had to do a new 5 minutes of clean material that could make grandma and grandpa, mom and dad, and the kids laugh. So you develop a wealth of this kind of material. And so that's why the singers wanted me, because I wasn't going to offend their audiences. When cable television came along, all these children were being raised into this kind of language, thinking it was part of a comedians that all comedians talk like that. They never heard of a Jack Benny or a Bob Hope or a George Burns.
That's such a good point. That's the number of platforms for comics was just so much smaller than the number of platforms now. I mean, everybody, can just fire up a camera and, build their own sort of YouTube feed with their own comedy. How did you end up, take me to the moment, then I want to get back to that, skip around a little bit, but you mentioned the Tonight Show, because at that time, the Tonight Show, for just a lot of the reasons that you've just mentioned, it became the crown jewel. Like, if you could get on the Tonight Show, it would open up your world. And I'm wondering, if you can just give me the before the Tonight Show life of Tom Dreesen, and then the Tonight Show, which you clearly must have crushed, and then the life after the Tonight Show.
When the team split up, I ended up on the West Coast, because in 1975, wherever you went in America, people say, "What do you do for a living?" You say, "I'm a stand-up comedian." The next question out of their mouth was, "Oh yeah? Have you ever been on Johnny Carson?" If you haven't been on Johnny Carson in the eyes of America, you just weren't a comedian. Freddie Prinze did one appearance on the Tonight Show, and he got a sitcom the next day. So how do you get on the Tonight Show? All the comedians began to migrate out here to the West Coast, because in those days, Johnny Carson had been in New York for years. And in 1972, he came out here to Burbank, California. Freddie Prinze did one appearance on the Tonight Show, got a sitcom the next day.
Yeah, Chico and the Man, I remember.
Chico and the Man. So everybody, now we got to get out here. There was a place called the Comedy Store. There was no other comedy clubs here in LA at that time. The Comedy Store was on Sunset Boulevard, and it was the hottest place in the world to be for a comedian.
So who was, at that time, Tom, it was who on stage, who was getting hot at the Comedy Store? Like, who were the comics that we might...
When I came out, I was the first of my class to get the Tonight Show. But I was on stage every night with all these unknown comedians: Jay Leno, David Letterman, Robin Williams, Gallagher, Michael Keaton, the girl, Elaine Boozler, the girl waiting tables was Deborah Winger. This is what I was.
Wild. And you were you were the first in the class, as you say. You were the hot one. You were the one who just had done the Tonight Show.
Yeah, I was the first to break out of that group to do the Tonight Show. And David Letterman always talks about him and Johnny Dark and the comedians were sitting in the back of the Comedy Store watching me on my first appearance on the Tonight Show. And the pressure is enormous. It took me a long time when I first came out here. I hitchhiked up and down Sunset Boulevard. I was begging to work for free at the Comedy Store. And finally, I got an audition with Mitzi Shore, who owned the Comedy Store, for 5 minutes. If she liked you, she could put you on the regular schedule. If she didn't like you, it's back to Harvey, Illinois, pal. And fortunately, I got over and I became a regular. And I start working my way up to prime time. And I start pestering the Tonight Show coordinators to come and see me. And I finally got Craig Tennis one night to come and see me. He was looking at a comedy team called Bauman Eston and a new kid named Billy Crystal. I don't know whatever happened to Billy, but I'm with Mark Thompson right now. Anyhow.
Yes,
anyhow, so
well
so they saw me, and I got over. He said, "You're on next week." I get there next week on Tuesday. I'm all excited. I told the world, "You're going makeup. They take you up to your dressing room. They bring you down to the green room. You're getting ready to go on." And they ran out of time. They bumped me. They said, "Tommy, come back next week." I came back in a week, in the makeup, up to the dressing room, down to the green room. We ran out of time, Tom, 3 times in a row. The 4th time I go there, I'm in makeup. Fred Dakota, the producer, comes in the makeup room. He said, "I got bad news for you." I said, "What?" He said, "You're going on tonight." Now, the pressure, because 28 million people watched that show. Not only that all of America, most of America watched that show, but the buyers from Las Vegas, all the hotels watch that show. The agencies, William Morris, all these agencies, IFA, all these agencies watch it. Managers watch it. Corporate people watch it. So the pressure is enormous. I'm behind that curtain. And not only that, my mother had everybody in Harvey, Illinois watching the show. So if I bomb, I can't even go back home.
She has this is for the 4th time she has everybody from Harvey, Illinois watching, right? What, didn't you have 3 bumps? Isn't before?
Yeah, there was 3 bumps before. Now it's the 4th time. And when I walked out there, when Johnny, you're behind that curtain, they're in commercial break. Doc Sevenson's playing because they're in commercial break. Wow, and the music stops and your heart stops. And the light comes on the screen in front of you. And that you're going on. And Johnny introduces you. They open that curtain. You walk out there. You hit your mark. And I got my first laugh. And my first joke got a laugh. And then my second joke got a laugh. Then my third. Now I'm on a roll. Johnny Carson and Ed McMahon are laughing behind me. And I got 8 applause. I finished. I said, "You've been a wonderful audience. This is my first appearance on the Tonight Show. Show business is a tough life. So if you like me, just if you like me, and you're Protestant, say a prayer. If you're Catholic, light a candle. If you're Jewish, somebody in your family owns a nightclub. Tell them about me, will you please?"
That's so wrong. You probably couldn't even do that line today.
The Jewish people were the biggest laughers up at all.
That's actually true. They probably would not get much blowback.
No, that's not. Yeah. Although some idiot today would try to find out, the politically correct police would try to find something wrong with it, because that's all they have to do. They sit in their mom and dad's basement and they're 52 years old and they're still living with mom and dad. But they say, "I know, I'm going to write that's a terrible line or an anti-Semitic line."
You're not wrong. I mean, it's easy to get some social media mob now. It's so much easier to be critical, and so I think you're not wrong. So after that, you're saying, and you did so well, and all those people that you just mentioned, they're all watching. All those entities, the agencies, the club owners, et cetera. And what a great way to stick the landing there on the Tonight Show. And you continue to do those Tonight shows. To the point that, I mean, you're up there. What did you 61? Is that how many you did?
Yeah, I would do 4 and 5 a year. One year I did 8 in 1 year with a couple guest hosts as well. But when you first go on the Tonight Show, to America you had arrived, but to my industry you hadn't arrived till you sat down and talked to Johnny. Right. But to our industry, when you sat down and talked to Johnny, you had arrived. And also after that first appearance on the Tonight Show, this is what happened. I got William Morris signed. William Morris, they wouldn't even allow me to walk by their agency, let alone get signed. But the next day, CBS signed me to a development deal. A guy named Lee Curlin was watching from New York, and he signed me to a development deal. Think about this. In those days, I had a wife and 3 kids, and my rent was $225 a month in an apartment that I couldn't hardly make payments for. The next day after the Tonight Show, CBS wrote me a check for $10,000 and gave me $1,850 a month for 1 year for a development deal. I was doing Dinah Shore, Merv Griffin, Mike Douglas, Johnny Carson, Midnight Special, Rock Concert, Soul Train. I'm the only white comedian ever do Soul Train. I was doing American Bandstand. I was doing Hollywood Squares, $20,000 pyramid. All these shows, whole world opened up to me. And
wow.
And all of us, for the first time in my comedy life, even after the years with Tim and Tom, the first time the rent was paid for a year, groceries, shoes for the kids, I could relax and write material. I could relax and not have to worry about it. Do we have rent money? Do we have grocery money? God, it was.
I love that. We're talking to the great Tom Dreesen. I want to go back to Sinatra now. So remind me then how Sinatra and you connected.
I was touring with Smokey Robinson, and we were in Lake Tahoe at Caesars, and Frank Sinatra was appearing next door at Harrah's. Well, I had worked Harrah's many times with Sammy Davis, and so I was with, show you Fate again. I was with Smokey for a week there, and on any night I could have gone over to see Frank. I wanted to see him. I had seen him perform live in a Coliseum. I'd seen him twice, and he created more excitement walking to the microphone than most people did with their whole act. The room would just electrify when he walked out before he even sang a note, So I don't know why I picked this night. One night I called the maitre d' over at Harrah's and I said, I want to come over. Oh, don't worry about it, Tommy. We'll take care of you. And I came off stage that night at Caesars, and I didn't even change out of my stage clothes. I went out the side door, and Harrah's there's a casino in Harrah's. I was running over there. I'm running through the casino because I didn't want to miss Frank's opening. And out in front of the casino is the vice president of Harrah's Hotel, a man named Holmes Hendrickson. And he was talking to a big heavyset guy with a cigar. When he saw me, he said, Tommy, come here. And I reluctantly went over because I didn't want to miss Frank's opening. He said, Tommy, this is Mickey Rudin. Well, I recognized the name. That was Frank Sinatra's lawyer. He said, Mickey, this is Tom Dreesen. And I think Tom would make a great opening act for Frank Sinatra. And the lawyer got a pained expression on his face, and he rolled his eyes. And he winked at the vice president, but I caught the wink. He looked at me. He said, hey, kid, if I gave you a week with Frank, would you want more than $50,000? I said, Mr. Rudin, put it this way. If you gave me a week with Frank, would you want more than $50,000? He said, no, he said, I like this kid, And a week later, they called me, said, would you do 1 week with Frank Sinatra at the Golden Nugget in Atlantic City? I said, of course. I figured I'll try to get my picture taken with him. I'll hang at every bar back in Chicago, and that would be it.
And that'll be it. It'll be a one-off.
Yeah, that's. I really never thought of it more than that, Mark. And the second night I was with him, he and his wife Barbara took me out to dinner, and I can remember like it was yesterday. In the middle of the meal, he set his knife and his fork down, and he said, I like your material and I like your style. I'd like you to do a few other dates with me if you're interested. And I didn't say, let me check my calendar. I said, yeah. And it turned into 14 years, 45, 50 cities a year. And Coliseums, 20,000 seat arenas, 40,000 in Hawaii, flying in his private jet, staying in his home 6 times a year, riding around till dawn with him night after night. He never went to bed till the sun came up, whether on the road or off the road. At first, he was the boss of this tour. Halfway through, he and I were friends. And by the end of his life, he was like a father to me. I miss him every day of my life. And I thank God. And in the 14 years I toured with him, Mark, I turned down more sitcoms than most comedians get offered in a lifetime. Because every time they offered me that, I would have to think about I couldn't tour with Frank anymore. And I knew it was the end of an era of a show business that I loved. Dean, Frank, and Sammy. I did Dean Martin roast. I played golf with Dean. And Sammy, and now Frank. I wanted to ride that train to its very last stop.
Thank you. I totally get that. I mean, when I think of a Mount Rushmore-ish kind of show business representation, those guys that you mentioned are there. And to think that you're in the middle of it, why would you hop out? I understand it can be seductive, your own TV series, et cetera, but wow, what a tough decision to make to stay on tour with Sinatra. So I have a question about, you say that you're driving around with him all night and everything. What kind of stuff do you guys talk about? I mean, are you drinking like crazy? What is is it just is everybody so wasted that no one can remember what they talked about, or is it philosophical, or what is it?
No, not me. I quit drinking, and I had to be very careful around, because he'd say, sometimes I'd order, it looked like a rum and Coke, but it was just Coke, and once in a while I'd have a beer, and he'd say, come on, have a real drink. He drank Jack and, Jack Daniels, on the rocks, sometimes with a splash. But no, when we'd ride around together, it's interesting that you bring that point up, Mark. When I got alone with Frank in the car, riding around the desert till the sun came up, There were times he wasn't the great Frank Sinatra. I wasn't the comedian Tom Dreesen. He was a kid from Hoboken, and I was a kid from Harvey, Illinois. And that's what we talked about: childhood, family, growing up, lessons in life. And it was a great relationship that we had. In the end, it crushed me when we had been touring all these years and never knowing when is it going to end, and the time came when it would. But nobody said anything. I mean, nobody said to Frank, he wasn't well, and he hadn't worked in a long time. And I'd go visit him all the time. And one night I went over to see him, and he wasn't well at all. And nobody
was
ever
he in
brought
Palm
up,
Springs, or where was he living?
It was here in on Foothill in
Okay.
Beverly Hills. And I went over to the house to see him, and we never brought up, because you're always thinking like we're going to perform again. And he wasn't well. He was sitting down. He had like a blanket on him. We were talking. I said, I got to go. And he said, where are you going? I said, oh, my ex-wife is in town and the kids. And he had met her, and he said, oh, give her my best. I said, okay. And he said, I said to him, he always, whenever he said he love you, he'd punch me on the jaw. And I got even a picture of it. He'd go, love you, pal. He never, he said, love you, pal. But this night, as I'm getting ready to go, he said, you know I love you, Tommy. And it stunned me, because he never said that. He just didn't do that. Like I say, he'd say, yeah, I love you, pal. But he said, you know, I love you, Tommy. And I started stammering. I said, oh, yeah, I love you too, Frank. And I don't know what made me say it, but I stumbled. I said, hey, get well, and we'll go back on the road again. And the moment I said it, I could have bit my tongue, because and he put his hand on my cheek. He said, you're going to have to go on the road by yourself from now on. And that's when I knew that he knew he wasn't ever going to sing again. And
God, that's an intense story, buddy.
I turned around and I walked away. I went outside. I had tears in my eyes. And Barbara came out, his wife. She said, are you okay? I said, yeah, I'm fine. That was pretty rough. And she said, keep coming, Tommy. He enjoys seeing you. I got in the car and I'm driving away, and I'm thinking, Frank Sinatra is never going to sing again. That's the saddest show business news I've ever heard. And
that story has a lot wrapped up in it. That's a very poignant moment, and you're right, and a significant one. You're saying from a show business and sort of the culture standpoint. Yeah.
And I'll tell you one other quick story. When he died, Barbara called me over to the house, and she told me she wanted to be a pallbearer. There was paparazzi out in front of this Foothill home on Foothill in Beverly Hills. As I was leaving, I was listening to a talk show, and a woman called in, because everybody was saying Frank Sinatra died. Frank Sinatra. It was a talk show. A woman called in. She said, my husband fought in Korea, and he fought in Vietnam. She said, and he didn't cry at his father's funeral. But today, when he heard Frank Sinatra died, he came home, and he's in his room right now, and I hear him sobbing. She said, I don't get it. I don't understand. And the radio guy didn't either, but I did. If you were a Sinatra fan, Frank Sinatra's music was a soundtrack of your life. You went steady to his music. When somebody loves you, it's no good. You got married to his music, love and marriage, love. You got divorced to his music. You're in that bar. It's 2:45. There's no. You got remarried. Love is lovelier the second time around. His music was a soundtrack of your life. If he died, if that voice died, something inside of you died as well.
That's so profound, because music does touch us that way, and it connects with different parts of our life. I think that's a great point for all brilliant singers. The thing about Sinatra is that he was such a classic stylist, and his music endured and does endure for all of these decades, that, as you suggest, it's through a lifetime. That's why the loss of someone like that is even more profound. I know we have to wrap up before too long. I kind of want to
take your time. I have some time.
I have a question, one more little follow-up about Sinatra, then I want to double back to your life in Chicago a little bit. The question about Sinatra is, there's this sense, and Rickles used to give him a hard time about, hey, Jilly, that's enough. That's enough. Leave him alone. This kind of guy who was almost a mobster type while also being a show business figure. And it was such an open joke. It was everyone talking about it. My question to you is, how did both Frank take that, and also was that like a real representation of who he was? I mean, were there two Franks, the one we saw on stage, and then there was this tough mobster guy off stage? Doesn't sound like it based on what you've said.
As an Italian American, I refuse to answer that on the grounds. I'm pleading the fifth. No, I tell you, did he know those guys? Of course he knew those guys. You know,
Right.
we all knew those guys. Anybody who has any ounce of brain knows in that era, they owned all the nightclubs. They owned the places you work. They owned lots. They had places in Las Vegas they owned. So did you know them? Of course you knew them. Were you one of them? That's another story. But you, of course you knew them. And of course Frank knew them. He did know them, and they were involved in his life. I mean, it's not a secret that he knew Sam Giancana and a whole lot of other guys, and they were huge fans of his. You know, but yeah, he knew them. Now, they several times he went in front of 11 grand juries and was found innocent every time. You know, I think a classic story that Mickey Rudin, his lawyer, told me. He said that one time he was before a grand jury and they gave some name. They said, "Do you know that the prosecuting attorney said, do you know Joe Stanucci, blah, 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 whatever his name is?"
Right.
And Frank said no. And he had an 8x10 envelope, the attorney, and he goes, "You don't know so-and-so Stanucci." And he was ready to pull out an 8x10 with a picture of Frank in him. And Frank said, "No, I don't know him. I met him, but I don't know him."
That's great. That's
and the
great.
guy dropped the envelope on the floor because he knew once he pulls that picture out, Frank could say, "And last year I took 8,000 pictures just like that all
Sure.
over the country." So that was the one thing, the connection. But yeah, there was a connection there. By the way, and that was part of the great mystique about this man, Frank Sinatra. Aside from the fact that he was the greatest pop singer of all time, and there's no argument to that, you know, the greatest pop singer of all time, he was a brilliant actor. He did 61 films. He won the Academy Award. He danced with Gene Kelly, for God's sake. He won the Academy Award and never took an acting lesson, you know, in From Here to Eternity.
Wow.
So
Wow.
that in itself would make you want to go see him. But the mystique, was he connected? Was he not? That mystique also. Now, why was
You're right.
the
It only fed the legend. You're absolutely the myth around him. Yeah.
Exactly. Yeah.
It's funny. You just made me think of it. In Oakland, of all places, because we have a lot of people from the Bay Area watching and listening right now. The Oakland Arena, I went to see the Rat Pack. It was the 80s. It was their final tour, I felt, because everybody was just getting so old and kind of it was Dean Martin, Sammy Davis Jr., and Sinatra. And I'll never forget it. I scraped together my magic beans so I could buy 2 tickets for my girlfriend and myself, and we went. And Dean was first, and Dean forgot the lyrics or was like meandering around. Really, it was, you know, the audience is with him, but I mean, he was really struggling. And who came on stage? Sammy Davis Jr. came on stage almost right away, and it became sort of Sammy and Dean. And you saw how these guys were all covering for each other. And I think even maybe Sinatra took the stage quickly. I mean, it wasn't supposed to be that way. It was supposed to be each one performing individually, and then they come on as a group. Clearly, that's the way they had planned it. But as Dean faltered, the need from the other two was felt, and they stepped up. And I said to my girlfriend, "I don't think Dean's going to make this tour." And sure enough, the Chicago was the next stop, and they didn't have Dean on the tour anymore. They substituted somebody else.
Liza Minnelli.
Liza Minnelli, exactly. Good knowledge.
I was there that night. I was there. Across the street from the Chicago Theater where they were performing was ABC Studios. And Oprah Winfrey went on hiatus for a week, and they gave me that studio for 1 week to do a late night talk show. A man named Joe Ahern was the head of ABC at that time. He said, "Tommy, the studio's yours for if you do a late night talk show." I followed Nightline on ABC, and the show was called Nighttime, starring Tom Dreesen. And my first guests were going to be Frank, Sammy, and Dean. I'd already talked to them. They all agreed to it. And so they were going to be my guests. So all the promotion that whole week was that Frank, Sammy, and Dean were coming on Tom Dreesen. So Nighttime starring Tom Dreesen. And the night before the show, Dean and Frank got into it a little bit, and Dean went home. And everybody said that he had kidney trouble and all that stuff, and went back. It wasn't true. They had a run-in. And so anyhow.
Wow.
I'm hung out to dry. So
that's go ahead.
Barbara Sinatra and Altavis Davis subbed for them. They were my first guests, and they came on because Frank and Sammy went on to New York to get Liza, to rehearse with Liza.
Sure,
So,
sure.
Yeah, but I was in the audience that night. Yeah.
You bring up an interesting thing. I hadn't even thought of it. Honestly, it's never occurred to me, which is weird. Those guys hung out a lot together, the Rat Pack, and you were around them. They couldn't have possibly all gotten along all the time. There must have been some friction.
Well, first of all, Frank was the leader, and everybody knew that. I mean, that Sammy Davis used to sing on stage, I gotta be me. He'd say, I gotta be me. I'd rather be him, funny, Frank. Yeah,
maybe they did all get along then. They kind of knew your pecking order, and what you're saying.
In their younger days, they really got along great. They loved one another, and they were just huge hits. There wasn't any competition, although everybody knew Frank was the leader of the group. But as he got older, Frank also had mood swings, and it's not a secret anymore. Frank suffered from, he told Walter Winchell many, many years ago that he thought he was a 24-karat manic depressive. Later on in life, Frank was using, I think it was Alavil or something like that, a mood stabilizer. So, a few drinks, and here, I was a bartender for years, Mark. And when I was a bartender, before I was ever in show business, when I came out of the service, I noticed my buddies, when they were drinking, they would go through one of the 3 R's. I always called it the 3 R's. Some guys, a couple of drinks, and they were Rocky Marciano. They wanted to fight everybody in the place, Some of them, a couple of drinks, they were Rudolph Valentino, and they wanted to every girl in the place, And some of them, they became Rip Van Winkle. They just, so alcohol affect everybody differently. Frank was Rocky Marciano. A couple of drinks, and he would be, he'd get feisty. And by the way, one of the reasons the staff liked me around him, and then both my parents are alcoholic. I grew up in bars. My mom quit drinking later on in life, but I grew up in taverns. I grew up around drinkers my whole life. So I could see that coming on. And if I saw that coming on Frank, I'd say, hey, Frank, tell me about that time you and Dean got in the sports car. Oh, yeah. I could always change the.
That's a gift, buddy. That's a gift. Yeah.
Well, I saw it coming because, again, I was around alcohol my whole life. So I could change the subject and get him laughing again and all that, He was
Tom, I was just going to go back to Chicago. I've heard so much. There's the Rat Pack. We've shown some pictures along the way of the Rat Pack. That's the 3, and then Lawford and Joey Bishop are also in there, right, Tom? They were in that same orbit.
I knew Joey real well. I didn't know Peter. I knew Frank disowned him at one day. He got very angry with him over the whole Kennedy episode, and so. There's a movie
he felt that Lawford might have had something to do with dry cleaning the whole.
And it was unfair because Peter was you're killing the messenger. He came to Frank and said, how can we go into this whole thing without going into a long story? In the 1960 election, when John Kennedy got elected, there was a lot of controversy about what happened in Illinois and in West Virginia. The truth is, Frank Sinatra got a call from Joe Kennedy.
Jack Kennedy's dad, right?
Yeah, and he's an astute politician. He knew all about politics, and he wanted his son to become president of the United States. He wanted his first son to become president of the United States, but he was killed in World War II, and so Jack was the next step, and he wanted Jack Kennedy to become president. And so Frank and Sammy and Dean campaigned all over the country for them. And a few months before the election, Joe Kennedy called Frank Sinatra to his home and said, my son cannot get elected. We will lose West Virginia. It's 95% Protestant, and they won't vote for a Catholic. And we're going to lose Illinois. The downstate Republicans are going to beat us. He said, the guys that can change that. And Joe Kennedy said, I know them too, but I can't go to them. Because the Kennedys were bootleggers long before they were legitimate. Right. And that's historically accurate. So Frank went to Sam Giancana, and they're talking. Long story short, in West Virginia, all votes swung the election. The 30,000 dead people voted in that election.
Right.
And so now
that was legitimately an election that had questions around it. Yeah.
Now, after that, John Kennedy was coming to Frank's home, his compound, to be there. And Frank was excited because he said to his mom, he said, this is his story. He said to his mom, Mom, you know, in one generation, came from Italy, the president of the United States is staying in our home. And he put, in those days, $1.3 million, a heliport, everything. It's almost completed when Peter Lawford visited and said, Jack can't come here. And Frank said, what are you talking about? He can't come. He said, he can't come here. Bobby doesn't want him to come here because you know those people. And Frank said, I know those people. Those people his dad asked me to go to because I know those people that got him elected. And he said,
yeah, he's right. He's right.
And Peter said, don't kill the messenger. But he told Peter, get out of here. And he never talked to Peter again, which was a shame.
Wow. Wow. That's a great story, boy, about Sinatra really just feeling snubbed after he had done the heavy lifting to get the guy elected.
And did all those things. One thing about Frank Sinatra that you learn, he was very, very, very loyal to his friends. If you were his friend, there wasn't anything he wouldn't do for you. He was also a Sicilian. If you worshiped the ground you walk on, or he hated you, But hold on one second.
Yeah. And then.
But however.
Go ahead. No hurry.
To prove that point. Wow, I got a dry spot in my throat. Hold on.
Yeah. Don't choke to death on our show, Tom. It would be a less than elegant way to end your career.
But it could boost the hell out of your career.
That's true. That's true. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you for thinking that way, Tom Dreesen.
But the point is, the first time I ever visited Frank's home, they had a buffet, and the first night there was all these stars there at a cocktail party that night, and I was stood in the back, and there was Gregory Peck and Jack Lemmon and Kirk Douglas and their wives, and there's Robert Wagner and Joe St. John and Angie Dickens and all these stars, and I'm going, wow. And then there's a guy in the corner that I said, God looks so familiar. A good-looking guy, nice. I said, he looks so familiar. He must be a character actor. Later on, I found out it was Spiro Agnew. Spiro Agnew. Well, here's the point. Yeah. Spiro Agnew had fallen from grace from the sea. He was a former vice president of Richard Nixon, but he had fallen from grace from the sea and was blackballed everywhere he went. But he had been Frank Sinatra's friend back then, and he was still his friend now. Just because you came into some hard times in your life, that didn't change Frank's opinion, and that's how loyal Frank was.
That's a great story to tell on the heels of the other one too, because Sinatra could have said, "Nah, it's a bad look to have Spiro Agnew here, the corrupt vice president." But that wasn't. Loyalty took favor over that, priority over that.
Friends, the last lesson Frank Sinatra taught me, he taught me a lot of lessons. We're at his home. It was his 82nd birthday. He died 5 months later. All of these stars that I mentioned, most of them were there that night, and Frank was off to the side. He wasn't well, and he was eating slow, and he had a caretaker help him. And everybody started making small talk. They're waiting for the cake to come out. And somebody said, where's the best place to live? And Gregory Peck said, well, Veronique and I have a villa in France, and we like it there. Robert Wagner, Joe St. John said, we have a place in Aspen. We like it there. And Frank, off to the side with his head down, said, the best place to live is where your friends are. And everybody went, oh, yeah. My point here is the greatest career show business has ever known, arguably. Amassed a fortune, all these awards, Oscars, Grammys. In the end, it wasn't about any of those things. It was about friendships. And that's the last lesson he taught me.
That's terrific. By the way, tell me about Frank Jr. passed away. Is that what happened, Tom? Tell me, it was Frank and Nancy were the two kids, right?
And Tina.
Tina,
Frank,
sorry, excuse me.
Two girls and a boy. Tina runs the company now, Frank Sinatra Enterprises. And Nancy's 83 or 84. She's still hanging in there. I guess I haven't seen them in years, but
the son Frank Jr. Is he still alive? I'm so sorry.
No, he passed away. No,
that's what I thought. Yeah, that's what I thought. Okay.
He passed away a few years back. Well, while I was on tour with Frank, the first 7 years, the last 7 years, Frank Jr. conducted the orchestra.
Oh, sure, right.
Dad.
Yeah,
and he was a great musician, and a good singer. But how would you like to go into baseball with your name Mickey Mantle Jr.?
Thank you. It's just it's brutal. I mean, I always felt for the guy, even though I know he came from some privilege because of his dad. But I always felt from it, that name. Yeah, you're right. I mean, Mickey Mantle Jr., there they are, the two kids. Thank you, Kim. I want to go back quickly in our last few minutes and just ask you about some stories from your childhood, because you did come, it's a different place now, Chicago, you know. Back then, there was a tremendous mob influence. And as you say, mobs were all in the clubs and everything. And I'd forgotten that until you reminded me of it. I know that, you know, they owned like stuff in restaurants like jukeboxes, you know, like you couldn't, it was a weird thing. They infiltrated, the tentacles of the mob were everywhere. You know, it wasn't just protection money, it was other stuff too, right, Tom?
Sure, they owned every bar or restaurant anywhere that had a jukebox. That in those days they didn't call them the mafia or the mob; they were the syndicate. They were syndicate. Any video machines, and they put them in your bar. You know, you had no choice. Frank Polizzi, who was the owner of the tavern, was an Italian guy who came to this country when he was 7 years old. The guy that was my mom's brother-in-law, my uncle. When I was a little boy with my shoe shine box, he just opened a tavern. He had a jukebox he paid $100 for. It played 78 records. One day a truck pulls out in front. This is in my book, by the way. A truck pulls out in front. Two big guys bring a big, beautiful jukebox in. And Frank is in the back having lunch, and my mom and my aunt are tending bar. And they came in and they said, "Sign here, Mrs. Polizzi," to my aunt. She said, "What's this for?" He said, "For the jukebox." She said, "We have a jukebox." She said, No. We supplied the jukeboxes here. She went and got Frank. Frank comes out. He's wiping. I never forget. He's wiping his mouth off. He said, "What is it, fellas?" A mob guy from Blue Island, Illinois, named Babe Tuffinelli controlled all that. He said, "Mr. Tuffinelli sent this jukebox over. Signed, Mr. Polizzi." He said, "I got a jukebox. Get it out of here." They said, "Mr. Polizzi, our orders are." He said, "I don't care what your orders are. I have a jukebox that I worked in a factory 12 hours a day to build this tavern and to buy that jukebox. Get it out." They wouldn't get it out of there. They said, "We're leaving it here, Mr. Tuffinelli." Frank Polizzi put it on a two-wheeler, took it outside, and dumped it on the sidewalk, and it broke. My mom and my aunt pulled out the rosary. You know, now I'm a little boy.
Yeah, really, that would be the kind of thing could legitimately get you killed, right?
A half an hour later, out in front, you hear a car pulls up, doors open up, three guys get out. One of them is this guy, Babe Tuffinelli. He comes in, he confronts Frank Polizzi, right toe to toe. "You broke my jukebox?" Frank said, "I told your goons to get it out of here," and they wouldn't get it out. And he went toe to toe with them. And they're going back and forth arguing. He said, "I worked at a factory," and he said, "You know, go muscle other people. But I'm Italian too." You know, and he said, "And I came here to this country when I was 7 years old." And they're going back and forth. Now, Tuffinelli finally ends the conversation. He said, "I'm going to let you have your jukebox. But if you ever leave this tavern business, I want you to come and work for me." And Frank Polizzi said, "I'd never work for the likes of you." He didn't like mafia. You know,
wow.
Said, I wouldn't. And that's, you know, where I came from, you know, so they controlled everything. Yeah. But however, you know, again, there's other sides of those stories. If you know, wherever the Italians were, there was nobody roaming the streets snatching purses and writing graffiti, because you just didn't do that. You know,
sure,
when I was growing up,
it's the line that, you know, the garbage got picked up, you know, without any problem, and the trains ran on time type thing. It's a weird trade-off, right, Tom?
Yeah,
you know.
Well, hey, by the way, my charity in Chicago is the Illinois Fatherhood Initiative, because I'm all for fatherhood in America. When I was growing up, in the black neighborhood, in the Irish neighborhood, the Italian neighborhood, the Polish neighborhood, Jewish neighborhood, we were more afraid of our fathers than we were of the police. If there was a young Polish kid roaming the Polish neighborhood snatching purses, the policeman in that neighborhood took him by his ear and took him home to his father. Said, "You know what your son was doing? That happened in the black community and all the other communities." We were more afraid of our fathers. One night, I was setting pins in a bowling alley. My black friend Everett Nicholson, who I wrote about a lot in my book, coming home, the squad car got us. "Get in the car. What are you guys doing out so late?" We said, "We're setting pins in a bowling alley." "Okay, we'll give you a ride home." Gucci, Everett Nicholson, his nickname was Gucci. He said, "Officer, please don't. You'll never see me on the street again. If I pull up in front of my house in a squad car, there's hell to pay with my father. Please, you'll never see me on the street again." And Gucci was a tough guy. Everett Nicholson was a tough guy. My point of that whole thing is we were more afraid of our fathers than we were of the police. In Harvey, Illinois, in 1960, 3% of the children being home. Today, 72%. Three out of every white children in America have no father in the home. almost 5 out of every Hispanic have no father in the home, and 7 out of every 10 African American have no father in the home. That's the destruction of America. Break down the family. And they have successfully done that with a thing called the War on Poverty, which well-intentioned but misinformed. In those days, in 1964, Lyndon Johnson passed this thing. If you have one baby out of wedlock, you get $250 or something. If you have 2 babies from 2 different men, $500. If you have 3 babies from 3 different men, $750. And by the way, if one of those men is living with you, cohabitating, you get nothing. So the government became the father of the family. Where we grew up at, the mantra was all throughout the neighborhood. You get a girl pregnant, you'll stand by her. If a girl got pregnant, when I was 13 years old, my mother said, you get a girl pregnant, you'll stand by her. I was 13 years old, but that, the point is,
I guess your mom sensed something in your life, Tom, that you might be sexually active. Yeah.
Of course, all of us. But the point of that is that if you don't take care of that baby, we, the family, have to. Sure. And then the government came along and became the father of all these. And that's what, if anything is you won't destroy America from without. We're a very strong military. I'm an ex-GI. We got the greatest military ever assembled. But you can destroy us from within. Anyhow, that's the end of my.
No. I think these are good points all. And you on the one hand to build a safety net for those who need it. You don't want to always just hope that Tom Dreesen's charities have to do the work of supporting families that need support. But by the same token, as you say, you don't want to incentivize not actually, having a family or having a structure of some kind that can support these kids. I think that structure, and then we can wrap up, but I think that structure can take the form of a lot of things that, don't have to do with money, like, these community centers and pre-K stuff. I mean, this is important stuff in the development of a child. Wouldn't you agree?
Here's what I know. When I was growing up, that every Christmas and Thanksgiving in the shack that I lived in, that the Moose, the Kiwanis, the Elks, the B'nai B'rith, all these organizations would come and they'd bring baskets of fruit and stuff to the shack I lived in. And my mom, proud Irish mom, would say, no, we don't deserve that. My husband has a job. We don't deserve that. And us kids were trying to get around the door to get at the stuff, but my mom was right. He had a job and he should be taking care of us. But the other thing, it wasn't the government bringing food to us. It was people helping people. If you leave Americans alone, they won't let their neighbors go hungry. They won't. I mean, they will get together and do something. But when we keep relying on the government, all of a sudden we take away that personal responsibility. And it's my responsibility, Mark, if you're my next door neighbor and you're hungry, I've got to help you.
I think you really point to community and the power of community. And there's no question that those areas of life that involve community show the greatest support for, broken families or people in distress. There's absolutely no question about that. So how can you not support an effort like that? So Tom, you have a main website, don't you, Tom Dreesen? What's the
TomDreesen.com, DREESEN. Everybody puts an extra S in there, but it's DREESEN, TomDreesen.com. It's my website. It'll tell you where I'm at, what I'm doing.
And the charity is what I'm getting at too. Still Standing is the book that we're all going to pick up. And I'll tell you, and we'll super the name of the website too. We'll have it on screen as well, so people will be able to keep track of you. I'm so impressed, man, that you're still touring. I mean, when I say that, I mean, you've kind of done it all. You could just kick back and go play golf, but you really enjoy it. The one-man show particularly sounds terrific.
Yeah, I love show business. I hate getting there, but I'm not like a lot of comedians throw up before they go on stage. I can hardly wait to get out there. I love making people laugh. I went on the Comedy Store a couple of weeks ago with Bill Burr and Sebastian, Maniscalco.
Sure, of course, Maniscalco.
Great guys. And I just love that environment and making people laugh. It's so much fun.
Well, you're so good at it. It's also effortless for you. And, conversation is so effortless and you have so many great stories. I can't wait to get into your book. And you've given me a thrill because I really wanted to talk to you and have you on the show, and it's happened. So thank you so much, Tom, and all the best to you.
Same to you, Mark.
Tom Dreesen, everybody.
The Mark Thompson Show.
talking to you with my mute button on. Kim McAllister in for Mark Thompson today. I have to thank you for joining us. That very special conversation with comedian Tom Dreesen. Such great stories to tell. I hope you enjoyed it as much as I did. Tomorrow, Mark is back. We will have David Katz on the show. And I want to thank Beth for the super sticker today. We have Beth Farmer for $19.99, loving the interview, and Cheryl Massarelli with a $10 super sticker as well. Thank you so much for joining us on the Mark Thompson Show. Hope you will join us for the After Party Live, which is next. And again, Mark back tomorrow. We've got David Katz on the show, and it's going to be a really good one. So thank you to Albert. Thank you to Tony.
Stevens for the Mark Thompson Show. Thank you.
Thank you to Shadow as well. Thanks, everybody. Bye-bye.